Thank you for joining us. The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to welcome candidate Erik Paulsen, candidate for the City Council position 2. And I should mention that your challenger in this race, Thompson, had agreed to meet with us at this time. He contacted us. He has an emergency and is not able to meet today. So hopefully we'll be able to sit down with him in the future. But we're pleased to have you. As we mentioned, this is being recorded. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. Anyway, with that, pleased to have you. Why don't you take a moment, introduce yourself, explain why you are running, and then we will get into specific policy questions. So.
Thank you. Yeah. So good afternoon, Erik Paulsen. Where do I start? Every time I'm given a chance to give my stunt speech, I have to redo it in my brain. Longtime Vancouver resident to elementary, middle school, high school here. It's the place where I'm fortunate to have had a career, have a family. Both of my kids graduated from Vancouver schools. And as the kids were getting a little bit older and had a little bit more free time on my hands, I started looking for ways to give back to the community. And my journey began with a service on the Vancouver Planning Commission, which I served on for 8 years. 6 of those years I was the chair. And after being involved in the Planning Commission and learning about what the Planning Commission did, and importantly, what the City of Vancouver does and what is and isn't within scope of the City of Vancouver, I became interested in getting involved in an even more meaningful level. And I saw it and was successfully appointed to a vacancy on the City Council, which I then affirmed through an election with the community and since been reelected. Why am I seeking re-election? Primarily, it has to do with some key initiatives that are underway that I'd like to see through to their final completion. As a former planning commissioner, the first thing is the comprehensive plan that we're working on right now, which won't be completed until probably about this time next year. Comprehensive plan is our shared vision for how our community will evolve over the next 20 years. And I think it's really important that we have a good plan, that we feel good about the plan that we have, and that it's one that we can successfully execute. In addition to that, there are a couple of other things that the city's working on. As I think all of us know, the city is once again seeking the community support for law enforcement on the ballot this November. Hopefully that is successful and we can begin implementing that next year, along with the ongoing implementation of Prop 2, which has supported our fire. And then really importantly, when it comes to our unhoused population, I was a big proponent of funding for our bridge shelter. And I'd really like to see that up and operational as the next key component in the city's strategy around our unhoused population. So those are a couple of key initiatives that are underway that won't be completed by the end of this year that I'd like to see through the final fruition before I.
Great, thank you. And let's start with you touched upon homelessness there, and the bridge shelter is coming up. Has the city done enough? What have you learned through this process? What do you think the council should do differently moving forward?
I think that the city is viewed as a leader, not only regionally, but nationally in our approach to the unhoused within our community. I think we've had the right balance of providing resources, creating a sense of urgency within the community, eliciting support from our community through the support of our affordable housing fund, a portion of which is used to fund some of our efforts around this. That was successfully passed and then reaffirmed for a second time by the voters, which shows their support, not just for increasing the housing supply of affordable housing, but also supporting our unhoused in the community. This is a nationwide problem that afflicts our entire country. It's fundamentally rooted in my view, a couple of key things. Number one, the lack of supply of housing, which we're also working on. And number two, the growing gulf of inequality in our country. a lot of the things that are necessary to completely solve this problem are outside of the hands of the city of Vancouver. And so, we do lobby at the state and federal level for things that we feel will treat the root causes of this issue. But in the meantime, there are things that we can do and are doing, such as continuing to increase the housing supply and continuing to provide resources to get people off of our streets. It's something that I say often on the dais, and I think bears repeating here. In my view, this is a moral issue. When there are people dying on our streets, it's incumbent upon us to do what we can to get them off the streets, so that no longer is the case. I don't want to live in a city where people are dying on the streets.
And do you think those efforts, how would you assess them? Have they been effective? Have they fallen short?
Both. I think they have been effective. We have seen good placement for the folks who've come through our Stay Safe communities as well as our Safe Park communities. And we've got a good and increasingly effective partnership within the network of providers in our community, starting with the Vancouver Housing Authority. I think our Jamie Spinelli, who leads our homelessness effort at the city, has done a really good job of working with Andy Silver and the Vancouver Housing Authority to find capacity and find I think of the system as a system, and there are people who come into the system and they move through different stages within the system. And so our safe stays at the moment are, for lack of a better word, an intake, a place where a person can come inside, be safe, stabilize a little bit, and then move into the next part of the system, which is a little bit more permanent housing that the Vancouver Housing Authority provides. And there again, depending on where the placement happens, they can continue to get additional services, continue to stabilize, and hopefully eventually get into more permanent housing that is market rate housing. And then as that system and people progress through the system, then of course it frees up space for new people to come into the system. A current bottleneck, and the reason why we still have people living on the streets, is that we just don't have enough places for people to come inside, and that's where the bridge shelter comes in. And so that's the next essential piece to the puzzle in terms of that will be a little bit more of a congregate shelter, a little bit less permanent than the Stay Safes tend to be. But it will be a place where people can come inside. A place where they can be warm, they can be fed, they can receive services, they can be considered for placement in a Stay Safe or even directly into affordable housing or other housing. We're constrained by our ability to fund things, and we have a lot of different priorities at the city of Vancouver, and we have a finite amount of resources. And so I think with the funding that we've had and continue to have, I think we're doing a really effective job. And I think, the next important question would be, once the bridge shelter is up and we can assess the situation and see how that's playing a role in the system and what work is left to do, what is that work potentially? And if there is more work to do, how might we fund it? And that's an important question that'll probably take place in the coming years.
You mentioned the safe stay communities. From your perspective so far, have those been fiscally responsible, or would spending the money elsewhere be more effective in getting people off the street?
I believe they are fiscally responsible because I think that they play a key role in stabilizing people. And I think that's the key word. There are other ways that you can get people off the streets where people fall back out of the system again because they haven't been stabilized. And we've seen average stays in the Stay Safes that are averaging around 9 months, which is really good. So people aren't coming in and staying there. They're coming in and moving on to something else. Usually it's a more stable situation, and that allows opportunities for others to come into the system. And so when you look at what one Stay Safe costs on an annual basis, it's not a cost per person in a Stay Safe because you have to consider the fact that people are moving through those facilities. And so on a cost per case basis, it's a much different financial calculus. And I think that investment is definitely worth it because, again, the alternative is more people living on the street, more people dying on the streets.
Great, thank you, Colby.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask you about the C-Tran board.
Yeah.
Why did you support getting a legal opinion regarding the issue of proportionality?
Well, the main reason I supported that was because I felt that it was irresponsible for us to risk state funding. we have averaged $5 million in ongoing grants per year and an additional $5 million in one-time grants that we've used to fund things like our BRT and other important efforts in the community. $10 million a year is a lot of money for a transit system of our size. And the state was very clear and unequivocal in multiple communications with CTRAN that the consequences of it not adhering to what they defined as proportionality by October 1st would be that funding, we would no longer be eligible for that funding. The state was pretty well entrenched in their position from all the communications that we had with them in writing. And the composition board was also pretty well entrenched in its position in terms of what it felt was fair based on the representation on that board and the opinions held by that board. Time was quickly moving against us. I think when that decision was made a little over a week ago, or I made that request a little over a week ago, which was unanimously approved by the CTRAN board. We had 3 weeks left until October 1st. And 3 weeks, there was a two-part motion that I made. The first part was to ask for a stay, which essentially says push the pause button and give us some more time so we can sort this out. That my hope would be that would preserve push that deadline out. But getting a stay is not assured even within a 3-week time period because of how our legal system works. And the sooner we started that process, the greater the likelihood we would in fact get the stay and preserve that $10 million a year, which was my first priority. Thinking longer term, we have to somehow resolve this impasse between the state of Washington and the board composition group. And in my view, the best way to do that would be to get a definitive legal judgment from a judge who hears both sides of the argument and makes a final decision. And ultimately, sitting on the board of CTRAN, as I said, I believe it's my fiscal responsibility and using the word here, I used it the other day. My responsibility as a board member who effectively was caught in the middle, right? We have the state on the one hand saying, CTRAN, do this thing. We have the board composition committee, which is a different body, on the other hand, saying this other thing. And in the middle is CTRAN, who would be penalized by losing those funds if we weren't in adherence by October 1st. So that was the reason for my motion. I'm hoping that we'll get the stay, first and foremost, preserve that funding. And then ultimately, I'm hoping that we'll get a final legal decision on what proportionality means and that the composition board will adhere to that guidance and make a decision that is in conformance with the law.
Do you have a personal opinion on this? I mean, it seems from our reporting that state's position is logical, that in a service area, if you represent an entity that has more people, you should have greater representation on the board.
Yeah.
Is what's wrong with that position?
My opinion on it is, I think that the smaller cities collectively have grown accustomed to a certain degree of representation based on the decision that was made last time the board composition was done. I didn't participate in that process. I wasn't on the CTRAN board at that time. My understanding of the decision-making process that led to that composition was that we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. We wanted everybody in the system to feel like they had their fair say and they felt good about their representation. And I think that was good intention, well-intentioned. And I think that the board has operated well under that structure. Here we are in a situation where the state is coming in and saying, actually, no, that's not appropriate. I empathize with the small cities because once you have something, it's difficult to give it up. And I think that they make compelling arguments about their views on what proportionality should look like. And so, and as a representative of the city of Vancouver, of course, we would like everybody to collectively get along. You didn't ask me about this, but I'm going to address it anyway. There have been threats about folks leaving the system. I don't want to see that happen. I think that our region needs a robust transportation network, and that means the entire county has service. I don't think that our community gets stronger if a small city leaves the CTRAN system. I think that weakens our community. And I think about our region. I don't think about just the interests of the city of Vancouver. So what would I like to see in terms of a final disposition? I'd like to have a definitive legal ruling about what proportionality means so that we all know what the rules are going forward. And I'd like for that decision to be rendered in such a way that there isn't a perception that one body or another within the region used its influence, however you want to define that, to force a decision that favored them. Because those kinds of allegations have been insinuated. And, I don't think that gets us to a place where we're going to have a strong and collaborative system in the future. And that's my ultimate aim, is to preserve the funding and preserve the current structure of CTRAN and build on the success that we've enjoyed for the past few years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Sure. So in your voters pamphlet statement and on the website, you make a point about how important it is to listen to constituents and other voices. So what kind of grade would you give yourself and the city council for doing that? I know that there's been some criticism of the city council for not being good listeners.
I feel like I'm a very effective listener. I feel like that's one of my strong points as an individual and as a legislature. And I am very accessible, and
So, but your email address is not available, is that right?
that's right.
But you feel like you're accessible even without people being able to email you directly?
People can email me directly by filling out a web form and specifying my name when it comes to me. And I hear from individual constituents on a real regular basis who follow that process. And when an individual constituent corresponds with me individually, I always respond, and happy to meet with anybody individually, and have done throughout my service as both a planning commissioner and city council member.
Do you see any need for any change in how the city council receives feedback?
I think that we have done a good job of balancing the interests of doing the business of the city, which every Monday we have a business meeting, and we have to make important decisions that have ramifications for all the citizens in the city. It's important when we make those decisions to get feedback, and every single one of those decisions is ultimately subject to a public hearing and open public testimony. In addition to that, twice per month, we have an open forum for anybody to come to us and talk to us about any issue they want to talk to us about. And once per quarter, we have a community conversation where anybody can come and talk to us about anything they want to talk about. So I think that is a good balance between getting input that's specific to issues that are at hand, and also hearing from constituents about other things that may not be on the agenda but that they want us to hear about.
Thank you. Craig, anything else?
No, that's good for right now.
I want to circle back to homelessness. So you talked and showed your support about the bridge shelter and the whole funnel going from the bridge shelter and beyond, and with the safe stays. But even after we build the bridge shelter, I mean, there's still going to be a lot of homeless people with mental health issues and drug addiction who will refuse that. Considering that there is space available in the bridge shelter, what do you think the city should do to deal with people that are refusing those sorts of services? How hard do you think the city needs to do?
I first want to address a key issue of your question, which is that there are many folks who are unhoused who do have some combination of a mental health condition or a substance abuse condition. And the city of Vancouver is not a provider of services in either of those two areas. And so we rely on partners within the community at the county level and in the not-for-profit space and the state level to help us connect those folks to those services. Very specifically to your point, in my view, when a community has sufficient capacity that anybody who's currently living outside can come inside, and if a person refuses that invitation, our position should be either you come inside or you can't be here. Because we're willing to provide a space for you.
So do you think they should be arrested in that case?
You know,
They're trying to
how does that, our jails are full. So I don't know that necessarily arresting people is the ultimate solution. I think that's not going to get a person off the streets. I think that is one tool. We have seen success. I'm talking with Jamie. We'll have our next monthly update on this coming Monday, but every month we get an update because we've declared a state of emergency and we get a monthly update. We get a lot of statistics, but we also get a lot of anecdotal stories from Jamie. Our most recent area that we made off limits to camping was the area right at the bottom of Andreessen where Burbridge Creek crosses underneath. And it had been a chronic area. It's an area I'm very familiar with. It's on the Burbridge Trail. I run that trail every day. I've continued to run all throughout this entire time period, whether there are encampments or not. I think it's my responsibility as a policymaker to see things for myself firsthand. And when we cleared those encampments, and prior to that on the sound wall, what we have found is that there's a proportion of people who say, yes, we'd love to come inside. Thank you for the invitation. And then there's another group of people who say, no, thanks, we're good. And inevitably they move elsewhere in our community or elsewhere outside of our community. Jamie uses the metaphor of squeezing a balloon. As we continue to make more and more places off limits, all that means is that people are just gravitating towards the increasingly scarce places where they can camp. And that's creating a problem. Earlier this week, I met with property owners who own property just west of here, who would love for us to do something about the chronic problem that has plagued this part of town for decades now. I don't think I have to tell any of you that because you come to work here every single day and you see that problem. It's my hope that if we create enough capacity, that eventually we can get to a point where there are no places in the city of Vancouver where that kind of chronic behavior is continuing to manifest itself, because we can invite people inside or tell them that they are no longer welcome to live outside.
The capacity of the bridge shelter is 160.
It's been a little bit of a moving target. It started off at the higher number. I believe 160 is the current target, yes.
Do you feel like that's enough?
Our latest counts are north of that. And again, it's not a static situation, because if you say on January 1st of this year, I'm just picking a number, there were 450 unhoused folks in our community. And then you said on July 1st of this year, there were 425. It's not the same people. If you do a by name list and you compare it to prior by name lists, again, it's people who are moving in, people who are moving out. The person who's housed right now is living paycheck to paycheck, is one paycheck away from being unhoused. And so there are people that we're bringing inside through our current process and through our current funnel, as you said. But unfortunately, as we've continued to place people, there are other people who are becoming unhoused because housing prices continue to rise at a pace that outpaces income. And so income inequality continues to get worse and worse. And so the bridge shelter, I don't think, is going to get us to a place where we do have sufficient capacity to begin uniformly throughout the city saying we have some place for you to come inside, but it gets us closer. And as I mentioned earlier, then we're going to have a conversation about what comes next. But for me, the ultimate goal is to get to a place where we have sufficient capacity to invite everybody inside or ask them to move on.
Well, what do you think will come next after that?
It's an excellent question. I don't want to presuppose what that is. And the reason I don't want to is because we've learned so much. And if you'd have asked me 4 years ago what would come after the stay safes, I wouldn't have probably said a bridge shelter. But as we've learned from what works and learned best practices in other communities, we've decided that makes the most sense for where we are now. But I think it will ultimately come down to an assessment of now that we've got the bridge capacity we've got the bridge shelter at capacity, we would need to do an assessment of what is the remaining situation and learn more about the folks who remain unhoused and find ways that. So the thing that I've learned more than anything else about this issue of the unhoused is each individual is truly an individual. Their path to becoming unhoused is specific to them, and their path path to being housed again is specific to them. And so we can't take one size fits all approaches. We have to be able to meet people where they are and put them on an individualized journey that's going to get them back to housing. And until we understand these are the folks that are remain unhoused, what their typical situations are to the extent that there are trends and patterns within that, we can't really say this is going to be the best solution to that problem. Having said all of that, I think it's also important, and I've said this before, that we try things, but we're also willing to admit that maybe that didn't work. And like the kids say these days, pivot. And I use the word fail fast. That's a kind of a business term, but I think it's important that as policymakers, we're willing to try innovative things. But if it's not proving successful by whatever metrics we determine are predictors of success, that we say, no, that's not working. We need to try something new. I feel like we've done that. I think that's part of the reason why we've enjoyed success and are viewed as a best area of best. We have folks from around the region and around the nation coming to Vancouver, to learn from us. And I think that speaks to the leadership and the success of our strategy so far.
Yeah, so this is kind of a broad question for Erik. In your opinion, what do you think the city council could be doing more to support local businesses?
Thank you for the question. It's really important because small businesses are our single largest employer within the city of Vancouver, and having a vital ecosystem for small businesses is critical to our economic development strategy moving forward. I think step one is something that we've already done, which is to begin to bring some of that economic development horsepower in the city, within the city's control. The ecosystem in our community is an interesting one. We have Columbia River Economic Development Council. We have the Chambers of Commerce. There are several. And we have Identity Clark County. And then more broadly speaking, we have Greater Portland Inc. and some of the regional economic development strategies. But those are regional, either at the Portland metro area or the Clark County area. We've been beneficiaries. We've been supporters, both financially and otherwise, of all of those organizations. But we've reached a point now where the city is large enough and our needs are specific enough where bringing that kind of horsepower within the city makes a ton of sense. We recently were given a blueprint for what that looks like. And a key part of our economic development strategy going forward is exactly what you just said. It's understanding what the needs of small businesses are, and it's providing to those needs. And that can span a wide array of things from, for lack of a better word, consulting services about what it means to start up, what are the licensing required. One of the stories I love the most is when Little Conejo was opening up, and there used to be the beauty school, right? And they had to rehabilitate that space, and there was a lot of permitting and other things that were required to get that done. And our planning department and our permitting department and our economic development department were hand in hand. And I think a huge part of the success of that restaurant, which is one of my favorites in the city, has to do with the kind of partnership that we have done and should continue to do. And I think that having more and more resources to provide that kind of support to small businesses, it's daunting. You might have a good idea, like I think I can open a business to do this and such, but a lot of folks don't know how to get from there to actually opening the business. And there are lenders who might help you if you qualify on a credit basis, but maybe you don't even know to start the conversation there. But being able to go and have a resource to say, I want to start a small business, where do I start? Have a roadmap for that and have folks who are cheering you on and helping you out would make a huge difference. And ultimately, our medium and large employers of the future are going to be our small businesses of today. That's why this is so important. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Got anything else? You mentioned at the start some of the projects, ongoing projects that you want to see through.
Sure.
What is something new that hasn't been started yet that would be a priority for you?
Performing Arts Center and the Arts Hub. That was a fast answer.
So you've thought about that.
A little bit.
And one, how can the city go about facilitating that, and why is that important too?
An important first step was the approval and implementation of the cultural access tax, which the city council unanimously supported, and which we're now collecting funds for effective January of this year, and we'll begin putting those funds into our community next year. We just approved the funding plan and the different categories and the different proportions of that fund that will go to different areas. You know, whether it's new arts organizations that we want to invest in, existing arts organizations who want to do new initiatives, or capital facilities that are needed in our community, such as the Arts Hub at the former library location on North Plain, as well as conversations about a potential performing arts center, which would accommodate a long overdue need in our community for performance space. And that cultural access tax is a key piece of that puzzle, and it's in place. And so now we have a funding source for all of those things. Every vibrant community that you can point to anywhere in the world or in this country or in this region has a cultural and vibrant arts culture within the community. We have one. It's not well known or understood because we don't have enough ways for it to show itself off, for lack of a better word. I love going to First Fridays at the Arts Hub, and Christine, who's currently activating that space for us while we continue to do construction. She does a phenomenal job at programming those First Fridays and featuring all different kinds of cultural activities. We have for Chinese New Year, we did that. For Vietnamese New Year, we have that. There is so much vibrancy in our community that folks don't get access to. And a really great way to do that is through the arts.
Where do you think that performing arts center should be?
I think it should be in downtown.
Downtown.
Would be part of the convention center expansion.
Possibly. There's some synergies that we could realize there. The reason I think it should be downtown is I think about myself as a patron of the arts, and I think about how I want to spend my time. I'd want to go to a meal before an event. I'd want to go to the event and maybe afterwards go someplace and have a conversation about what I just saw with the folks who went with me. And I think that's a part of the arts experience. And I think having something downtown that's accessible and provides people the opportunity to experience the arts in that way, as well as we would want, my view of what a performing arts center in our community should be is not a palace for the privileged, but the city's living room, a place where schools can have events, where different cultural groups can have their, whether it's an annual celebration or periodic celebration. Dios de los Muertos is this month or next month, and we could do events there associated with that. I've already mentioned the different Lunar New Year celebrations, and there are many others. It could be a place for that. It could also be a place for the symphony to hold performances. It could be a place for national acts to stop on a tour. It can be a place that can serve many needs throughout our community. And but it should be a place that's accessible, whether that be via transit, whether that be ample parking, and whether that be other add-on activities such as dining and entertainment that are in the region and accessible. And also in the area, Craig, that you mentioned is walking distance to the waterfront and uptown and downtown. So there's a lot of different options that come along with that type of a location.
So briefly, how does the city go about facilitating that?
Well, we've done 2 studies about the viability and feasibility of it. And the city council authorized a study which is currently underway, which will ultimately result in a pro forma plan for what is the actual size of a facility, how should it be programmed and operated, and what could some financial sort of operating costs and capital costs look like. That should be presented to council by the end of the year, the work product of that work. And then that'll be a really important next step in the process in terms of the conversation about do we have an appetite to participate on the capital side and to what extent? And do we have an appetite to participate in the operating and to what extent, and then what degree of community support will be required. It should be a public-private partnership. All of the successful facilities like this that you look at in the region and around the nation operate in that way. It's a proven model of success. And so that's the vision for performing arts moving forward.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Complete Streets program. That's one that has gotten a lot of people's attention over these past few years. Specifically with McGillivray, would it not be possible for the city to meet its goals while maintaining 2 lanes of travel in each direction, given that you're dealing with, it's pretty broad? Because there's already a bike lane, et cetera. What is your feeling on the whole McGillivray situation?
It's interesting because I've talked to a lot of folks, including the folks who are leading the initiative effort, and I've had coffee with them, I think 2 or 3 times. I had a really robust dialogue with them about their concerns and their thoughts about how the process has unfolded and how, from their perception, it was incomplete. And then I've also talked to transportation staff and traffic engineers. We talk about how fundamentally McGillivray was engineered in such a way that it just lends itself to certain travel speeds, and those are unsafe travel speeds. And I know that because I travel McGillivray on a real regular basis. It's actually my preferred route to go east-west within the city. I don't like driving on no plate. I don't like a 3-lane boulevard with 40-mile-an-hour speed limits. I'm uncomfortable. I'm much more comfortable driving down McGillivray. But if I drive 25 miles an hour down McGillivray, I'm an impediment to the rest of the folks who are driving down McGillivray. And they make it known to me that I'm an impediment to them.
Friendly way, but maybe not that friendly.
Friendly way, yes.
I've been there, seen that happen.
And so when a traffic engineer says to me, McGillivray is engineered for speeds that are above the posted speed limit, that makes sense to me. I've traveled it. I've actually, on occasion, inadvertently gone over the speed limit because it just naturally lends itself to those travel speeds. So from an engineering perspective, like, how do you solve that problem? You narrow the street. When you drive down a narrow street where there are cars on both sides, you just naturally slow down. When you're on a 3-lane boulevard and it's wide open, you naturally speed up. If you drive down Mill Plain, even in the 2-lane version of Mill Plain, say from the Heights to here, 50 miles an hour feels comfortable. It's not the speed limit, but a lot of people drive 50 miles an hour down Mill Plain because that's the way the road's engineered. So if our ultimate goal is to have safe travel speeds in an area that, by the way, is but for a dentist office kind of midway down that corridor and a couple of schools, it's all residential. The travel speed should be 25 miles per hour or lower. And people who are walking, biking, using other mobility devices, or driving should feel comfortable on that corridor. And so could we potentially engineer it in such a way that it continues to have 2 lanes? Yes, we could. Is that going to ultimately solve the issue of safety and travel speeds on McGillivray? The traffic engineers say no, it won't. And for me, ultimately, in the last 24 hours, we've had yet another unfortunate pedestrian fatality, 2 of them in the city of Vancouver. The city of Vancouver, each time we get the numbers, is dead last or close to last in the state in terms of fatalities and other incidents between pedestrians and bicycles in the state of Washington. So we have work to do. And just like every person who lives outside who dies on our streets, each person who's walking down the street or riding their bike down the street who's killed, that's an unnecessary loss of life. And so to me, anything that we can do to make our streets safer is something that we should seriously entertain. The traffic engineers also say that McGillivray on 2 lanes will, be perfectly viable. I know that there are a lot of, that's not an apples to oranges comparison, but I happen to use MacArthur Boulevard on a real regular basis. And I can remember when it was 4 lanes and it's been 2 lanes for a while. I remember when that change happened, and I remember that there was tremendous resistance to it, and it works just fine. And I know that there's not ingress and egress to individual houses from MacArthur, and there are other reasons why it's not apples to apples. But ultimately, if I'm choosing between safety and convenience, I'm going to choose safety.
And as one who, as you said, you have met personally with
Yes.
some of these folks, do you feel that the city did in fact do a good job of outreach, of communicating its plans and its positions where McGilvery was concerned?
I think we always have opportunities to learn. I have been on city council for most of the complete street implementations that have taken place, beginning with Columbia Street. We learned a lot with Columbia Street, and we've improved our outreach in that area. We've had other complete street projects and other big projects since then, and we've learned. And I've asked the folks who live out east and are promoters of the petition that was delivered, what would you have had us do differently? And the problem is there aren't easy answers. The biggest thing that they say is you should have been open to more options than what were presented. The options that you presented didn't include keeping things the way that they are. And that's valid from the point of view from a person who wants to keep things the way that they are. On the other side of the equation, we talked to a traffic engineer who says, we wouldn't consider that a viable option because it doesn't solve the problem that we're trying to solve, which is unsafe travel speeds at the building. And so a traffic engineer wouldn't present a solution that doesn't solve the problem. So does that mean that our outreach was flawed or that we weren't listening? No, it doesn't. It means that we did listen. We heard that people wanted to keep things the same. We contemplated that, saw that it didn't solve the issue that we're trying to solve, and presented solutions that do solve the problem, and asked folks to choose from among those solutions.
Thanks.
Colin stole my question.
I'm sorry. But I'm not, sorry.
So, talk a little bit about, how the, Fleet Street program is working other than McGilvery. Are you satisfied with it? Would you make any changes?
Well, I wish it wasn't so controversial, for sure. There's a lot of interesting conversation about should we measure the success of Columbia by the amount of people who are currently using it. And full disclosure, I'm a person who travels the city on a bicycle on a pretty regular basis. And one of the things I know about using a bicycle in a system is that it is a system. And if you have one corridor that works, but other corridors that work less well, there are a certain number of folks who won't use the system because they don't view their ability to get from where they are to where they want to get as being entirely safe. And so when you build one part of the system and you measure it in isolation, it may not measure up to your expectation. But as you continue to build more and more of the system, what you'll find is that more and more people will begin to use that system. And so I think that as more and more sections of the system come online, 33rd Street is one that's currently underway. It does connect to Columbia. I would reasonably expect that once 33rd Street has been completed, then we'll see an uptick in use of Columbia because people will be able to access Columbia using 33rd Street and feel more safe doing it. And as we continue to put more pieces of that puzzle into place, the whole system's utilization rate will go up. And so, my hope for the future would be that we begin to see that utilization. We begin to see more and more people who feel comfortable traveling about the city, using all of the multi-mobility options, and folks begin to see the value of it in ways that maybe they don't see the value today, and that subsequent implementations elicit more and more support from our community.
Besides your experience on city council, what do you think the biggest differences are between you and your opponents' political views or policies?
I don't know a lot about my opponent's political views or policies. I had hoped to learn more this afternoon. I hope that Derek is okay. For whatever reason, he was unable to be here. From what I do know, I have met him once at a candidate forum, and I hope to participate in a candidate forum next week with him and learn more. We feel that we have the same view of what the priorities are within the city. We have similar views about where to focus time and attention. What I don't know is enough about his how. I know what I would do to solve the problems and the priorities that we share, but I don't know enough about what he would do. So that leaves me with the differentiator being, I have proven leadership success. And I think this is a time, we live in a time where there are unprecedented challenges facing cities. And I think in times like that, proven leadership is essential. And that's what I bring to the table.
Okay,
Ask everybody
go
about
ahead.
that hybrid, particularly since you are on the C-Tran board. And the whole question with light rail and the bridge is intrinsically tied to the thing with the composition. But what is your feeling on the bridge project in general and the inclusion of light rail?
We need a new bridge. That's my first priority, is to get a new bridge. It's interesting, as a civilian, I think about how I use the bridges that cross the Columbia River and the bridges that cross the Willamette River and other rivers. And I think about congestion, and it's a very sort of narrow view. But then when you learn about actually who uses that bridge and its essential role in commerce and the ways in which having the bridge the way it is today inhibits our opportunity for commerce. We have a tremendous asset in our community that isn't discussed enough, which is the Port of Vancouver. But a tremendous amount of the things that come into the Port of Vancouver, they leave Vancouver and they go elsewhere. That's the point of a port. And a big percentage of that stuff goes south. And when the bridge is a bottleneck, it inhibits the port's ability to attract that kind of cargo volume. And, when I learned that, such a large percentage of the bridge is commerce, it changed my definition of the vitalness of that project and the benefits of that project to our community. And so then we're left with the questions of how do we pay for it? And, that's really tricky. The majority of the funds are coming from state and federal dollars. And we're waiting for one last final decision on the last essential big piece of federal funding that's still outstanding. I'm not an expert on the bridge like the mayor is, because that's for passion. But I know enough to know that in order to qualify for those grants, certain criteria must be met. And one of those criteria is, what are the modes of transportation that are going to go across this bridge? And that includes pedestrians, it includes bikes, it includes transit. And there are different ways that you can, meet those criteria, and how you choose to do that scores differently. It's a game of numbers. It's this gets you this many points, this gets you this many points, this gets you this many points. Total up the points, compare it to other projects. Whoever has the most points wins, they get the money. And so if you're a person who wants a bridge like I do, and you're a person who understands that in order to score properly, you need the right amount of points, then ultimately what you say is whatever's required to get that number of points, to get that funding, that's the thing that we should do. That's just pragmatism, right? So if that thing is buses and that qualifies us, fine. If that thing needs light rail in order to score that number of points, that's what we should do. And so, I'm agnostic in the end to should we or shouldn't we have light rail. I think it has benefits that go way beyond transportation. I think it would be a huge boon for economic development in our community. I think that when we narrowly measure the benefits of something like light rail, or even more broadly, things like public transportation in terms of ridership and cost recovery, we're missing the point. I think that when you build a BRT, you see construction pick up all on that corridor. I think that when you build rail projects, you see even more construction in the places near those stops. And so I think we need to view transit not just in terms of a transportation solution, but in terms of a broader economic development strategy that's going to bring not just jobs to our community to build it, but jobs to our community to build other things that will come along with those transit things. So if light rail is required to get that bridge built, then that's what I will support. And we'll collaborate in whatever way is necessary with whomever in our region needs to be collaborated with to find a funding mechanism to pull our share of that funding.
Thank you.
Would you want light rail regardless if it meant the bridge were to be built or not? If it was guaranteed to be built, would you want it?
If it was guaranteed to be built and you could build it without light rail, I'd have to look at that. I've been sort of living in a world based on the formula, as I understand it, at the federal government level, that it's a part of the package. Now, of course, there's a lot of changes happening at the federal government level right now. And so I've viewed it as sort of a preordained outcome. And I've sort of explored it from that perspective of, okay, well, if we have to have it, then what are the benefits of having it? And I see tremendous benefits of having it. And so if you ask me, could it be built without it? Having gone through the exercise of understanding the benefits of having it, that would be a tough decision for me. It wouldn't be an automatic no.
Great, thanks. Anything else? Well, then, Erik, give us your final pitch. Why should voters support you? And feel free to mention any notable endorsements.
Sure. Hopefully I've proven throughout our conversation this afternoon that I understand the issues that face our community. And I have been participating in identifying and understanding those issues within our community between my planning commission service and my city council service for almost 15 years now. And so I know how to get things done in the city of Vancouver, both internally with staff as well as collaborating with my fellow colleagues on the council and on the other boards and commissions on which I serve. And I think that the recent CTRAN vote was an exemplar of that unanimous vote in support of my recommendation to preserve that funding for CTRAN. That's the way that I lead. I lead collaboratively. I listen carefully. I understand all of the options. I'll listen to anybody. I actually enjoy talking to people who don't agree with me because I learn more about what they believe and also what I believe. And I'm always willing to change my mind. I don't come to an issue with a preconceived idea. I am not an ideologue. I don't have a fixed view of how the world should be. I think that the typical resident of the city of Vancouver is pragmatic, and they want pragmatic solutions to the problems that face our community. And I'm a pragmatic leader. I find pragmatic solutions, and I work with folks to implement those solutions. And that's what I'll continue to do. Re-elected to the Vancouver City Council.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.